There are 6 big name bats that are still free agents and are out there that I think the Giants are in play to potentially sign. Obviously not all 6, but at least one of these 6, including Kris Bryant, Kyle Schwarber, Seiya Suzuki, Michael Conforto, Nick Castellanos, and Trevor Story. So we're going to talk about each and every one of those players and how they fit the Giants and what the contract would be next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already. And coming up on today's show, I want to break down these free agent hitters that we've been talking about all winter, but now that the lockout is lifted, now that the Giants appear to be mostly done on the pitching side with the addition of Carlos Rodon, we've talked about that the last few days. If you want to hear my thoughts on that and you haven't, you can listen to the last couple of episodes. But there are these free agent hitters. This segment of the market hasn't really moved post-lockout, or really, well, pre-lockout, there was a lot of movement at the top with the likes of Corey Seager and others, Marcus Semien. But for the Giants specifically, I think they're in a strong position with the rest of their roster set and mostly set and having a lot of financial flexibility here. They could definitely make a move on one of these bats. And in fact, I would think it's more likely than not that they end up with at least one of these players we're going to talk about today. So let's just jump into it. The first player I want to talk about is Kris Bryant. Now, of course, Giants fans are familiar with Bryant. The predicted contract is the first place I want to start here, and the average of MLB Trade Rumors, ESPN, and Fangraphs is for Bryant to get 6.33 years, so 6 or 7, more likely 6, for an average of about $23.2 million per season. So that comes out to about $150 million over the 6.33 years. Obviously, you're not going 6.3 years, but still, about $23 million over 6 years is a big contract. So we've heard reports that the Colorado Rockies are the team most aggressively pursuing Kris Bryant right now. And what I see when I look at Kris Bryant is someone who appears to be in some decline. And I think that Giants fans who watched him last year saw that he was more good than great in his time with the Giants. If we look at the StatCast data for defense, Bryant, according to outs above average, which is based on, it's a StatCast kind of metric. They're looking at where did you start, where did the ball end up, what was the likelihood that you got there versus, what did you actually do? And anyway, he was second percentile in the game in this category, outs above average. Outfielder jump, which is kind of your initial few steps towards the ball, how good was your route basically initially, and how quickly did you get off on that route, 16th percentile. And then offensively, we're just looking at projections that are more good than great. There are some projection systems that have him rebounding to being significantly better than he was last year, but mostly I think we're looking at a guy who's more about 20 percentage points above league average offensively versus a guy earlier in his career. Bryant was 40 to 50 points above average offensively in a all-encompassing metric like weighted runs created plus. He was at 148, 147 a couple of years. Last year down to 123, and I would kind of put him there moving forward with declining defense. So if you're looking at that and you're talking about a 6-year deal perhaps, I just don't think that this is the strongest fit for the Giants and that there are better options out there. And I would have concerns. I mean, if he's going to go to Colorado, I would imagine he would play third base more than the outfield because that is a big outfield. And I just had some concerns about his. I mean, Bryant had some difficulties at third base as well. So I just don't see Bryant as the strongest fit. We talked about that average contract prediction. It is worth pointing out that one source had Bryant at 5 years, $90 million, and another source had him at 8 years, $200 million. So there's just this huge spectrum of expectations in terms of what Bryant is going to get. And I think he'll probably end up somewhere in the middle, but maybe towards the lower end. But still, I prefer some of these other choices for the San Francisco Giants, especially when we look at what the contract expectations are. So coming up next, I want to turn our attention to some of the lefties in this group. It's a group we hadn't been thinking about very much, as we kind of thought they were leaning towards right-handed hitters, but we've heard that they are interested in lefties and, in fact, interested in the likes of Kyle Schwarber and Michael Conforto. So we'll talk about those two in just a moment. But first, it's that time of year again as college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting, wagering, information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. They've also got a lot of baseball action that's just gone up there recently, and we're going to continue to talk about those opportunities throughout the whole season on this show for BetOnline.net. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to continue looking at the free agent possibilities for the Giants. As we said, I hope I kind of explained why I'm a little bit down on Kris Bryant, particularly when he is the top predicted contract among this group. I don't think he's the best player in the group. So the fact that he's looking at a contract that may be triple what some of these other guys will get doesn't really make sense to me. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. His show is free and available wherever you get podcasts. So yeah, let's turn our attention to these lefty hitters. I want to talk about Kyle Schwarber and Michael Conforto, two players I think are really strong fits for the San Francisco Giants, given that we know they're willing to look at lefty bats in addition to right-handed options. So the predicted contract for Kyle Schwarber, averaging those three sources, is 3.67 years, so 3 or 4, more likely 4 according to the average of these three sources, at about $15.8 million per season. So fewer years and a lower average annual value than Kris Bryant, of course. And so that total comes out to a predicted $58 million. But again, that's over a fraction of years, which you're not ultimately going to have. So less than that if it's 3 years, more than that if it's 4 is the prediction. So what are we looking at when we talk about Kyle Schwarber? He's 29 years old, and Kris Bryant, by the way, is 30. He just turned 30 in January. Kyle Schwarber is 29, and he turns 30 in... he just turned 29 in early March. Kyle Schwarber had a monster offensive season. I think some of you may remember he went on this absolute home run tear early-ish in the season, and I think it started when the Nationals were playing the Giants. He was traded mid-season. I actually don't remember what team he even started on, but Kyle Schwarber ended up having a monster offensive season. Did he start with the Nationals and then go to the Red Sox? I'm kind of blanking on that. But when all was said and done, it was the best offensive season of Kyle Schwarber's career. Monster year, 266 average, but 374 on base, 554 slugging. That's nearly a 300 isolated power. Those are the characteristics that the Giants like to see when we're talking about gets on base, patient hitter, and hits for massive power. The drawback with Kyle Schwarber is defense. We talked about Kris Bryant not rating well defensively. Well, Kyle Schwarber, in terms of outs above average in 2021, again, outs above average being that StatCast metric, first percentile for Kyle Schwarber. He has played a couple of different positions. I think the Red Sox tried to move him to first base. So it's kind of like Bryant in the sense that we talk about, okay, he's got some versatility, but I don't know how much credit you give a guy for being versatile if he's not good at any of the positions that he plays. Like, you can throw anyone at a different position and they probably wouldn't be good. And does that mean they're versatile? No. So I kind of view Schwarber as more of a DH, but the bat is such an impact bat that when you look at that contract, I think especially if you're maybe on the shorter term, like 3 years instead of 4, I don't know, you start to really be intrigued by what you see here. And maybe, I mean, the Giants have shown a willingness to kind of sacrifice a little bit of defense for offense. They've shown a big willingness for that. And I think that Schwarber could fit certainly when we're looking at the elite offense that he potentially brings to the table. His big kind of breakout year in 2021 offensively looks sustainable to me. And I mean, the weighted on base average 392, that's a great number. The expected weighted on base average, again, based on quality of contact, StatCast data, was even better at 399. So that's elite stuff. If we look at the Baseball Savant page, that expected weighted on base average, 95th percentile. His barrel percentage, 96th percentile. That's the rate of balls that you put in play that are barrels, and barrels are kind of hard hit balls at an ideal launch angle. There's a couple of meanings in barrels in the game of baseball. We talk about barreling up the ball. This is different. This is like an official stat, and it means you're hitting the ball in the air in kind of an ideal spectrum of launch angles, and you're hitting it hard. That's what we call a barrel. His rate, 17.5%, means 17.5% of the balls he put in play were this ideal type of crushed in the air contact, which again was 96th percentile. And Giants like hitters who can do that. Every team likes hitters who can do that. But I think given that expected contract, there's a strong fit here, and Schwarber is in high demand for good reason. So moving on, let's talk about Michael Conforto. The expected contract for Conforto is where it gets interesting because there's predictions that he may end up taking a 1-year deal. So overall, between the three sources, the prediction is 1.67 years at $18.5 million per season for a total of just about $31 million. So Conforto, like the other two, roughly, is 29 years old. He just turned 29 around the same time as Kyle Schwarber. Coming off a bit of a down year, I mean, a very down year. But prior to that, he's consistently been a really good hitter in his career. And defensively, he seemed to take a step backwards in 2021. But prior to that, like when we look at his last full season prior to 2021, in 2019, StatCast had him 87th percentile in outs above average. And he's always been a guy who was patient. And just looking at these 2019 numbers, for example, the barrel percentage, 82nd percentile. The expected weighted on base average, 86th percentile. Walk rate, 91st percentile. And again, good defense according to outs above average. But when we look at 2021, the outs above average falls to 41st percentile. Sprint speed is average at 52nd percentile, down from 65th percentile in 2019. So I don't know exactly what was behind his struggles in 2021, particularly on defense. But if we look at the bat, the weighted on base average was just 322. That's roughly league average. But the expected weighted on base average was all the way up at 350. So it kind of suggests that he may have had some misfortune offensively in 2021. And so it's a buy low opportunity if I've ever seen one. I think that he makes a lot of sense. Kind of the one caveat here is that the Mets did give him the qualifying offer, which he rejected. And so if the Giants were to sign Michael Conforto or any other team besides the Mets, they would have to surrender a draft pick, which I think is after the second round, immediately after the second round. And I mean, actually, okay, no, the Mets would gain a pick that was immediately after the second round. Does the signing team lose their second round draft pick? I think that's the case. It depends on a couple of different factors, but the Giants, being not a luxury tax team, we can look into the details. It's a little bit complicated with the qualifying offer stuff if the Giants sign a qualifying offer player. Conforto is one of them. Castellanos and Trevor Story are a couple of others. So we will look into that. But the fact is, Michael Conforto, like Kyle Schwarber, I mean, they're different. Michael Conforto, he's probably going to want to take a short-term deal to re-enter the market. So maybe San Francisco is not the most hitter-friendly place, and maybe Conforto doesn't realize that the hitting coaches can make a big difference. Maybe he does realize it, but he's afraid of the ballpark. So I don't know how likely this is, but I think that there's a strong fit here potentially with the Giants, and that at the predicted contract, it makes a lot of sense, as does Kyle Schwarber, and both of these guys more so than Kris Bryant to me. So coming up next, I want to talk about the righties, Nick Castellanos, Seiya Suzuki, and Trevor Story. So stay tuned for that conversation. But first, it's the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. They're all delicious, but Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Sounds delicious, right? Well, go to Built.com, scroll down to their macros chart, and you'll be blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb. Most Built Bars contain about 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, as promised, we are going to talk about the righties that potentially make sense for the San Francisco Giants. I also wanted to mention kind of clubhouse fit. I think that we all know Bryant was a good one, kind of an unselfish player and a team-first guy. I think the same can be said certainly of Kyle Schwarber. He's kind of considered in that same vein. And then Michael Conforto, pretty much in the same vein. I think there's a little bit of cockiness with Michael Conforto, but I certainly don't think of him as a bad seed in the game. But the next guy we're going to talk about, there is a little bit of a question in terms of the kind of clubhouse fit, and that would be Nick Castellanos. This guy definitely has an edge to him, and we've seen some of that. He's kind of been involved with some incidents on the field where, he flexed on a pitcher who was tagging him around home plate, who had hit him with a pitch or something. There's a little bit of a question, and I obviously don't know the guy personally, and I have to just go based on what we've seen and what we've heard around the league. Among all these players, I question the fit a little bit from a clubhouse standpoint with Castellanos. But let's talk about Castellanos. It's an ongoing theme with all of these players. Defense is a question. Castellanos, 4th percentile in outs above average. And I just want to point out right off the bat, chase rate, 5th percentile. So we're talking about a free swinger who's not good defensively, but expected weighted on base average, 87th percentile, barrel rate, 70th percentile. Predicted contract, by the way, he does have the qualifying offer, so you got to give up a draft pick. In addition to this rather hefty predicted price tag, 3.67 years, about $20.7 million per season, which over 3.67 years comes out to $75.8 million guaranteed. So again, more than that if it's 4 years, less if it's 3. But I personally don't see him as the strongest fit because we are talking about a guy who in a lot of ways is similar to the others in that strong hitter, but not a good defender. And so if you're taking your pick out of these guys, when you look at the predicted contract for various reasons, Castellanos has a higher predicted contract. And then you look at to me, the chase rate is a concern. This is clearly the Giants value patience at the plate, and Castellanos is not really known as a patient hitter. If, it works for him, he's a good offensive player. I'm not saying that he's not, but I just don't see him as the number one fit among these possibilities. And then you've got that kind of clubhouse edge that he might have, and I'm just not sure that's exactly the type of dynamic they want to bring to this team. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But strong hitter, projected to be in the neighborhood of 20 to 30, even 35% above average. If he can be, if he's going to give you 35% above average offense, then it starts to look far more intriguing to me. But if you're in the more 20% above average range and you're not getting any defense and the contract is as predicted and the qualifying offer and the chase rate stuff, that's why I just see this kind of falling apart and him not being their number one target. So coming up next, let's talk about Trevor Story. And then lastly, we're going to talk about Seiya Suzuki. So Trevor Story, right off the bat, I'm going to point out he's a shortstop, right? So I haven't mentioned Carlos Correa or Freddie Freeman in this exercise because I'm thinking about outfielders. Don't really see the Giants having a open spot in their infield unless there's some kind of dramatic move for like Correa and Longoria is moved or sits on the bench or plays second base or something in a platoon with La Stella. But for Story, I'm looking at him as a guy who could potentially play the outfield, although I know he said that his preference is to stay at shortstop. So might not be a fit here, but he's intriguing to me for the offense and the speed and the kind of clubhouse unselfish fit. I just don't think that it's the most likely thing to happen because he probably is going to end up playing somewhere where he can be valuable at shortstop. But if a team thinks that he could be a good defensive center fielder, for example, then I think there's some intrigue here. The issue is his offense has really fallen off the last couple of years to the point where this year he was only about league average offensively when park adjusted. He played in Coors Field and only hit .251 with a .329 on base and .471 slugging. It's a solid line, but it should be much better than that when you're playing half your games at Coors Field. He did deal with an elbow injury this year, and it's why his defense kind of fell off a cliff. He was an elite defensive shortstop, but then this year he was not very good, and I think it had a lot to do with his throwing, which had a lot to do with an elbow injury. And there's some concern that he could down the road or even soon possibly need Tommy John surgery. So there's a big red flag here. And then we're talking about a chase rate that was 29th percentile. So when he was at his peak, maybe let's look at his last full season, chase rate was league average, 49th percentile. He was an elite defender, an elite runner, and he's got a lot of power. So there's some intrigue. But let's talk about someone who I think makes even more sense and makes a lot of sense possibly for the San Francisco Giants, and that's Seiya Suzuki. The predicted contract, by the way, for Story is 5.33 years at $22.3 million per year. So it would be a hefty contract. So I'm kind of writing him off for now, and I think Suzuki may be the big prize here. Predicted contract, 4.33 years at just $11 million per season. And all we can really go off of is projections. And I don't really understand. Zips is projecting that he's 30% below average. Steamer seems to be projecting 40% above average offense. And some of the other projection systems are somewhere in the middle in the 15 to 20% above average range. So that just speaks to how difficult it is to project players coming over from Japan and that you don't know what you're going to get necessarily. So a lot of this depends on how the Giants thinks this player is going to play in the United States and in the major leagues. If you really think he's going to be 40% above average, you should just get into a bidding war when you're talking about the contract's only going to be around $50 million or so. Keep going because that type of offense is worth way more than that. So I don't know what the Giants project. I'm positive they have a projection, what they think Suzuki will do, and they'll make offers accordingly. There were reports yesterday that he had chosen the Padres, but Suzuki himself went on social media and said that wasn't the case. So Giants are still in play for Suzuki. They're still in play for these other hitters, and I think I would put money on them ending up with one of these guys rather than not. So that is all the time we have for today. By the way, Suzuki, I think, known as a good clubhouse presence from what we've heard about how he was in his days in Japan. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on the majors, past and present. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Helps me out so much, so thank you in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. Coming up throughout the rest of the week, remember, we're back to daily. We're going to break down in detail Carlos Rodon and the projections for him and the projections for the San Francisco Giants rotation and where Rodon ranks in the league. It's pretty darn high, so you're going to want to hear about that, and we'll also do a mailbag later in the week. Thanks again for listening. Stay Locked On Giants.